Um, there's a lot of good points that were mentioned, and I feel like a lot of those things help kind of put into perspective the issues that Washington has had this year. Because as it's been talked about, they've played these top ranked teams well. Like they should have won that LSU game flat out. Like that should not have gone to where that did. Um, and something that, Bella mentioned there with the rebounding is like covering a lot of teams, there are inconsistencies, right? Like there are some teams that are just flat out obviously inconsistent and always. I think Washington's inconsistencies at present, they're just not as blatant as some of the others. Like the rebounding is something that, yeah, we talked about a lot with Tina Langley earlier in the season. The 3 point like they are the second team in the Big Ten in field goal percentage and 3 point percentage. There are some games, as both of you have watched, where they just shoot horribly and they make poor shot decisions, or they just don't. They live and die by the 3 pointer, right? I think was it the Maryland game where it was brought up like the 3 point shooting. Did you want to shoot many threes? And I don't.
Oh
Tina
yeah,
was basically
half
like,
it
yeah,
was
half of
half
them.
of them.
Yes,
Half of them
yeah.
were from outside the arc. Yeah.
And she was like, well, I think the basic answer was no.
Yeah.
And I get stuck on their front court so much because like Delia Daniels is a graduate student. Brennan McDonald, who doesn't play that much, who got 49 seconds game time in the Maryland game, is a graduate student. Tyra Eke is a senior. So what happens next year, right? Where I've brought this up to both of you, more so Rowan and I have talked about a little bit more today, where like they've recruited well. We were just talking about how Chloe Briggs had was good at a college. I mean college, high school. Devin Coppinger was a top recruit. She's gotten more minutes as the year has gone on. They had another great class this year. Nina Kane is a forward. So is Bryn McGoy, but are those two don't really seem like people you're gonna stick in the post as much as wing, as they are wings. So I'm concerned about that because if this is an issue this year, right, and you're not leaving the Big Ten next year, what are you doing next year? Right? Like, I mean, obviously there is the transfer portal, there is that. Um, but I'm really wondering about that in the forward department. We talked, Rowan and I have talked about Olivia Anderson. So have Bella and I. Olivia, she's a sophomore, she's 6'6", so there's some size there in terms of height. I don't like doing this because it sounds weird. But in terms of a big, she's kind of a smaller big in terms of her size. Like Iowa had some like maybe more like sturdy bigs, right?
She's a Cameron
Um,
Brink big.
Mhm.
yeah, that's a
For
great,
sure.
yeah.
Yep.
And she's been out for at least a month or two. Olivia
Yeah.
Anderson has been, and
Yeah.
we don't know when she's going to be cleared to play. I remember the last time that the Huskies were home, I asked coach, I was like, "Hey, just wanted to ask, have you gotten an update on Olivia Anderson? She hasn't been cleared." I'm like, "Well, that doesn't help me." Um, and it's a fair answer, but I'm still curious about it because I don't know, maybe she could help you. Her trouble has been getting into foul trouble right when she hits the court, but I don't know, maybe a different look could provide you with something, So I don't know. I've maybe foolishly I've been encouraged by at least early in the season playing UCLA type, bringing the fight to them. Talked about the hustle, which was a great point. Um, the LSU game that they should have won, that tough game against Utah that they lost right after the UCLA game. Like they're in a lot of these games. And the end of game execution was something else. I talk like I'm worried about your paint presence. I'm worried about your end of game execution. Uh and then sometimes, as Bella kind of mentioned with other players stepping up to have those big games as well, like sometimes it is just Savia Sellers running the show, and then everyone else is just kind of a spectator at that point, which we're not having as much lately. But that
And we
actually
do
kind
love
of,
Savia Sellers, we must say. We
oh
love
yeah,
Savia
again, that
Sellers.
was gonna be a whole like bullet point was Savia Sellers. Just I remember talking to Bella about this because Bella was on this team as well last year, and the Sellers name kept coming up, and I'm like, okay, sure. And then I get here this year, and I'm like, oh wow, like Maryland, I think it was Maryland's head coach yesterday was talking about how she is their engine. Like things go when Savia Sellers goes, and that's the truth. I mean, you just like it felt bad when we're doing our game day posts, and I'm like, key player to watch. And I'm like, I can't put Savia every time. It just is unfair. But a lot of the times it felt like my player of the game was Savia Sellers because of, she exploded for a big point total or she made the critical, runs like she did last game against Maryland. So, I mean, it's exciting because she's a sophomore, right?
Brenda Fries was saying was hoping they could foul her out.
Yes. Well, that
Like
was the thing. She got
she
four
was on 4
fouls.
fouls for a while, and they were like, I was really hoping we could get her out of the game.
And then there were a few ones late into that game, I think, where she was driving to the basket and Bella goes, that was a little close. And I was like,
No, it
what?
was the steal and in the other
Ah.
end where she stuck her hand in and she got all ball. I think
Yes.
the refs decided she got all ball.
So, yeah, that was something. And I mean, even Ella Dean, like another writer that's there often asked me, in the beginning of the season when they were playing a bunch of non-conference teams, like, who do you want to watch this year? And I said, well, everything, because I kind of had kept loosely on focus on this team as you know someone whose parents brought him to a bunch of Storm games growing up. Like the women's basketball thing has always been in my head. I was like, well, Ella Dean seems like a fun player and seems like she can really explode. And he kind of laughed at me, and I was like, oh, okay. Uh, but her 40-point game against was it Northwestern on the road? Yeah, Northwestern on the road. Then they beat Illinois, and she didn't do much that game because she got into early foul trouble. She was a top scorer against Maryland. Like that duo is a solid duo. The Leia brings you great options, is a really versatile player, as you guys have talked about. And then it gets kind of interesting when you get to those other two spots in your starting lineup, right? It's just you guys talked about Tyra. And I was telling this to Rowan earlier, that Maryland game when she did get minutes, which she didn't start to get until like late into the second quarter, I want to say. Like there were a lot of rebounds where she was out of position, like reaching over the Maryland. I was like, that's a foul waiting to happen. So it just adds to my concern whether it is going forward in the tournament, because I think they're 13th in the Big Ten right now. So you're there. It's too close for my heart. And if you do get into the big dance, like there's concerns there. And then my concerns for next year, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on in the calendar year. I wanted to bring that right into.
Hey, Charles.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, how about them Huskies?
Ooh, purple and gold, baby.
Yeah. When are you going to watch all those away games, though?
All those away games. There are a lot of them, and I was hoping to come to Rough and Tumble because this is the home of Circling Saddle Sports. If that's okay with you.
I think that's a great idea. Hope to see you all here.